Notes on History of India by Babasaheb Ambedkar. 1. More important for the history of India were the conquests of the Sakas and the Yuechi, nomad tribes of Central Asia similar to the modern Turkomans. The former are first heard of in the basin of the river He, and being dislodged by the advance of the Yuechi moved southwards, reaching northwestern India about 150 BC. Here they founded many principalities, the rulers of which appear to have admitted the suzerainty of the Parthians for some time and to have borne the title of satraps. It is clear that western India was parcelled out amongst foreign princes called Sakas, Yavanas, or Pallavas, whose frontiers and mutual relations were constantly changing. The most important of these principalities was known as the Great Satrapi, which included Saurashtra, Kathiawar, with adjacent parts of the mainland, lasted until about 395 AD. The Yuezhi started westward from the frontiers of China about 100 BC and driving the Sakas before them, settled in Bactria. Here, Cadphises, the chief of one of their tribes called the Kushans, succeeded in imposing his authority on the others, who coalesced into one nation, henceforth known by the tribal name. The chronology of the Kushan Empire is one of the vexed questions of Indian history, and the dates given below are stated positively only because there is no space for adequate discussion and are given with some skepticism, that is, desire for more knowledge founded on facts. Cadphises I, from 15 to 45 AD, after consolidating his empire, led his army southwards, conquering Kabul and perhaps Kashmir. His successor, Cadphises II, from 45 to 78 AD, annexed the whole of northwestern India, including northern Sindh, the Punjab, and perhaps even Benares. There was a considerable trade between India and the Roman Empire at this period, and an embassy was sent to Trojan, perhaps and apparently by Kanishka, from 78 to 123 AD, the successor of Cadphises. This monarch played a part in the later history of Buddhism, comparable with that of Ashoka in earlier ages. He waged war with the Parthians and the Chinese, and his empire, which had its capital at Peshawar, included Afghanistan, Bactria, Kashgar, Yarkand, Khotan, and Kashmir. These dominions, which perhaps extended as far as Gaya in the east, were retained by his successors Huvishka 123 to 140 AD and Vasudeva 140 to 178 AD. But after this period, the Andhra and Kushan dynasties both collapsed as Indian powers, although Kushan kings continued to rule in Kabul. The reasons of their falls are unknown but may be connected with the rise of the Sassanids in Persia. For more than a century, the political history of India is a blank and little can be said about except that the kingdom of Saurashtra continued to exist under the Saka dynasty. Light returns with the rise of the Gupta dynasty, which roughly marks the beginning of modern Hinduism and of a reaction against Buddhism. Though nothing is known of the fortunes of Pataliputra, the ancient imperial city of the Mauryas, during the first 3 centuries of our era it continued to exist. In 1320, a local Raja known as Chandragupta I increased his dominions and celebrated his coronation by the institution of the Gupta era. His son Samudragupta continued his conquests and, in the course of an extraordinary campaign concluded about 340 AD, appears to have received the submission of almost the whole peninsula. He made no attempt to retain all this territory, but his effective authority was exercised in a wide district extending from the Hooghly to the rivers Jamna and Chambal in the west and from the Himalayas to the Narmada. His son Chandragupta II or Vikramaditya added to these possessions Malwa, Gujarat, and Kathiawar, and for more than half a century the Guptas ruled undisturbed over nearly all northern India except Rajputana and Sindh. Their capital was at first Patliputra, but afterwards Kaushambi and Ayodhya became royal residencies. The fall of the Guptas was brought about by another invasion of barbarians known as the Huns, Ephelites, or White Huns, and apparently a branch of the Huns who invaded Europe. This branch remained behind in Asia and occupied northern Persia. They invaded India first in 1455 and were repulsed, but returned about 490 in greater force and withdrew the Guptas. Their kings, Tormana and Mihragula, were masters of northern India till 550 and had their local capital at Sialkot in the Punjab, though their headquarters were rather in Parnien and Baik. The cruelties of Mihragula provoked a coalition of Hindu princes. The Huns were driven to the north, and about 565 AD, their destruction was completed by the allied forces of the Persians and the Turks. Though they founded no permanent states, their invasion was important, for many of them, together with kindred tribes such as the Gujars, remained behind when their political power broke up, and, like the Sakas and the Kushanas before them, contributed to form the population of northwestern India, especially the Rajput clans. The defeat of the Huns was followed by another period of obscurity, but at the beginning of the 7th century, Harsha, a prince of Thanisar, founded after 30 years of warfare a state which, though it did not outlast his own life, emulated for a long the dimensions and prosperity of the Gupta Empire. We gather from the account of the Chinese pilgrim Huas who visited his court at Kannauj, that the kings of Bengal, Assam, and Ujjain were his vassals, but that of Punjab, Sindh, and Kashmir were independent. Kalinga to the south of Bengal was depopulated, but Harsha was not able to subdue Pulakeshin II, the Chalukya king of the Deccan. Let us now turn for a moment to the history of the south. It is even more obscure both in events and chronology than that of the north, but we may not think of the Dravidian countries as uninhabited or barbarous. Even the classical writers of Europe had some knowledge of them. King Pandya sent a mission to Augustus in 20 BC. Pliny speaks of Madura, and Ptolemy also mentions this town with about 40 others. It is said that there was a temple dedicated to Augustus at Maziris, identified with Kraganor. From an earlier period, the extreme south of the peninsula was divided into three states known as the Pandya, Chera, and Chola kingdoms. The first corresponded to the districts of Madura and Tinnevelli. Chera and Kerala lay on the west coast in the modern Travancore. The Chola country included Tanjore, Trinuchapulli, Madras, with the greater part of Mysore. From the 6th to the 8th century AD, a fourth power was important, namely the Pallavas, who apparently came from the north of the Madras presidency. They had their capital at Chanjivaram and were generally at war with the three kingdoms. Their king, Narasimhavarman, ruled over part of the Deccan and most of the Chola country, but after about 750 they declined, whereas the Cholas grew stronger, and Rajaraja Chola, whose dominions included the Madras presidency in Mysore, made them the paramount power in southern India, which position they retained until the 13th century. As already mentioned, the Deccan was ruled by the Andhras from 220 BC to 236 AD, but for the next 3 centuries, nothing is known of its history until the rise of the Chalukya dynasty at Vatapi, Badami, in Bijapur. Pulakeshin II of this dynasty, a contemporary of Harsha, was for some time successful in creating a rival empire which extended from Gujarat to Madras, and his power was so considerable that he exchanged embassies with Khusru II, king of Persia, as is depicted in the frescoes of Ajanta. But in 642 he was defeated and slain by the Pallavas. With the death of Pulakeshin and Harsha begins what has been called the Rajput period, extended from about 650 to 1000 AD, and characterized by the existence of numerous kingdoms ruled by dynasties nominally Hindu but often descended from northern invaders or non-Hindu aboriginal tribes. Among them may be mentioned the following. 1. Kannauj or Panchala. This kingdom passed through troubled times after the death of Harsha, but from about 850 to 910 AD under Bhoja or Mihra and his son, it became the principal power in northern India, extended from Bihar to Sindh. In the 12th century, it again became important under the Gaharwar dynasty. 2. Kannauj was often at war with the Palas of Bengal, a line of Buddhist kings which began about 730 AD. Dharmapala, who was sufficiently powerful to dispose of the king of Kannauj. Subsequently, the eastern portion of the Pala kingdom separated itself under a rival dynasty known as the Senas. 3. The districts to the south of the Jamna, known as Jejak Abhukti, Bundelkhand, and Chede, nearly equivalent to our central provinces, were governed by two dynasties known as the Chandels and the Kalachuris. The former are thought to have originally been Gonds. They were great builders and constructed, among other monuments, the temples of Khajuraho. Kirdavarman Chandel greatly extended their territories. He was a patron of learning, and the allegorical drama Prabodha Chandrodaya was produced at his court. 4. The Paramara Power dynasty of Malwa were likewise celebrated as patrons of literature, and kings Munja and Bhoja were authors as well as successful warriors. The end.